Okay, we are live. Can you hear me?
Oh, right.
Can you hear me
I
okay?
can hear you.
All right,
Hmm.
awesome. For anyone new joining us today, my name is Winnie. I'm a therapist and a life coach. And with me today is Cartessa. I will let her introduce herself. Go ahead,
Hi,
Cartessa.
I'm Cartessa, and I am a licensed professional counselor. I'm licensed in two states, Missouri and Oklahoma. I specialize in working usually with adolescents. I also specialize in working with couples and family. So this is a really, really great topic for me.
Mhm.
I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Audrey, for letting us know that you can hear us. I appreciate that. And so we're going to be talking about generational trauma today. This one is definitely a very broad topic. So, of course, we're not going to be able to talk about everything that needs to be talked about when it comes to generational trauma. But what we're hoping to do today is to basically have a really authentic conversation about what a lot of these things mean to us and what we are doing um, in terms of breaking some of these generational things. And so that way we can work on our own healing in order for the next generation to continue with that pattern. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk a little bit more about what generational trauma is. So, I know that the actual term generational trauma and the field or the specialization of generational trauma is a newer term, I guess. There's not a lot of research on generational trauma yet, but um, the field is moving towards recognizing the impacts of how trauma affects not only the individual or a group of people, but how it continues to affect generations and members of a family. And so that's where we're going to come in today to just kind of talk about that and share what we've learned, what we know about it, how it affects people, groups of people, and everything like that, and maybe provide some resources as far as what you, our viewers who are interested, can start doing to work towards your own healing and finding help and everything like that. So let's go ahead and get started. What is generational trauma, Cartessa? I'll let you go first.
Okay. I first learned about generational trauma and cause and effect behaviors and manifestations and symptoms and all that in grad school studying systemic theory.
Mhm.
It was actually one of my professors' systemic orientation, and it was transgenerational. So
Mhm.
that was the premise that uh, there are to heal, like you definitely have to include the effects of one generation to the next and then to the next, and it all has to kind of come together.
Mhm.
It's a very systemic approach. So I did kind of know about it then, not kind of, I did have to, study it then.
Right.
Um, Going forward, I've, kind of gotten familiar with other generational trauma and
Mhm.
effects, by coming to terms with, like the African American community, the historical trauma that, generations before us have had to endure, and
Mhm.
how that has affected us today, even, and
Yeah.
how that will affect our next generation. So that's when it kind of hit me on the importance of, making sure that you're aware of what you're doing and how that affects, the other people
Right.
that are within your system, um, because that's going to ultimately affect, the generations after
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
So it was kind of
Absolutely.
like, I'm sorry.
No, I said absolutely.
Oh, okay. It was kind of like a small kind of awakening for me, like thinking about we were talking, you and I, earlier,
Mhm.
about the adverse childhood experiences. Okay, so that is a tool that a lot of clinicians use for people. That's really easy to follow, but the premise behind that is to kind of let you know, if you've experienced these things, that was traumatic, that, that
Right.
could have a traumatic effect on you as an adult. And, some people that have really, really high ACE scores, might be walking around and not even realize it.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I first read it, it was like, well, did you know someone that drank alcohol? Or did you have like yelling in your family? Or did you have physical violence in your family,
Mhm.
domestic violence? And these are things that, when you think about, you're like, okay, so if that did happen as a person, you don't really understand the entire realm of the effect that it has on everyone in, your household, your family.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And
I never had that.
for people who are not familiar with the ACE and the ACE study, it's basically a study that was funded by Kaiser Permanente, I believe,
Mhm.
back in the early 90s, I think it was. They followed a group of people starting from like when they were really young and then
Yeah.
into adulthood. And so they basically gathered data on the traumatic experiences that they had as children. And some of these experiences, like you were saying, Cartessa, didn't only involve things like neglect and sexual trauma and physical abuse. It was also emotional trauma, like yelling, witnessing people using substances, and all these different kinds of things that the participants of the study felt like were traumatic for them. And so when they followed these individuals into adulthood, they found that the higher or the higher ACE score that they had, where in other words, the more trauma that these individuals experienced, the number of trauma that they experienced was directly related to their physical health and some of the physical conditions that they had, such as hypertension, diabetes, things like um, obesity, and all these different types of things.
They were
Cancer,
even able to find a correlation with substance abuse.
substance abuse. I
Yeah.
think cancer was
Yes.
one of them. Basically, the more stress and the more trauma that these individuals experienced early on in life, the less able their immune systems were able to fight off diseases and stuff. And so, as you mentioned, clinicians, I think, use this tool as pretty much like a standard now, just to kind of ask people about childhood trauma. What were your early childhood experiences, just to kind of see how that's impacting your life now. And I really like what you said in terms of like some people might be walking around not necessarily aware of how adverse childhood experiences impacted them. And, people experience all these different types of physical health issues that are directly related to mental health issues that are directly related to early childhood trauma. Yes, Audrey says isn't there a significant link between autoimmune diseases and a high ACE? Yes, there is. So it's very important when we're talking about trauma and generational trauma that we talk about these things. And again, um, I've I've noticed that sometimes people will kind of compare their experiences to other people's experiences. So someone might be like, "Well, I was physically abused. You were only emotionally neglected, or emotionally you were emotionally abused. My trauma was a bigger trauma than yours was." And the reality of it is, I think that we need to get away from comparing our traumas and comparing our different experiences and problems from other people's stuff, because we're all different and these things affect us differently. And so when we're talking about trauma and generational trauma, I think it's really important to recognize not only um, the bigger picture of trauma, but also the individual effects as well. And so this is where talking about, these different effects on trauma and what we as individuals, along with our families and our communities, can do to start with the healing process is so important.
Yeah, I like how you said that it's not, I mean, it's not a contest. We don't need
Mhm,
to compare. I think that that is very important because, and when you're going back to, and I've experienced this personally, going back to individuals in my family, and if I'm like, hey, so, you know, if this is a problem or if this is causing a barrier to a healthier relationship, why is it that, we can't, try to address it and fix it, because this is something that is large enough to,
mhm.
affect the generations after
Right.
you. So, and I've gotten a lot of pushback about how, well, this person hurt me this way
Mhm,
and this person hurt me that way. And, I feel like I was traumatized
mhm,
this amount and, they weren't traumatized, or I don't believe that they were traumatized.
mhm,
And it's very hard to, um, get people to be objective about one, the fact that, in a situation where you have generational trauma, everyone has been affected in some way.
mhm,
Okay. Everyone has been hurt or, changed or has some sort of, they've been impacted in some sort of way.
yeah.
So, two, if you can't take accountability for you and what you contributed, then it's not going to help. Like the whole is, greater than the sum of its parts. So if you can't work on yourself when you come into your system, when you're like coming
Mhm,
into your family to improve it or improve the the emotional relationships there, it's not going to work. It's just going to
right,
be more trauma.
right.
So, and that's unfortunate because a lot of families cycle,
Mhm,
because you have families that have generations that, you know like a generation of brothers and sisters, and they didn't get along and they fought all the time, and then they'll cycle down, and then their children will grow up
yeah,
and they won't get along and they'll
yeah,
fight all the time. And it's just, it's unfortunate. But if that work is not being done, if you're not like, okay, so what part am I playing in this, or like, what could I do to
mhm.
help, or be better, then it's just not gonna be better. So,
Right, absolutely. And to be fair, generational patterns are really difficult to break. They're so difficult to break. And when we're looking at generational trauma, just thinking about the trauma that has been passed down from generations prior. And so if we take a step back, so kind of zooming out, and if we look at some of the major historical events that we were talking about earlier. So we look at slavery, we look at um, the Holocaust, we look at the Rwandan genocide, we look at natural disasters, we look at all these different things, like these big events that have happened on such a huge level, a huge systemic level. That's going to take a lot of work to start breaking these different patterns, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so recognizing that, and I think that even thinking about it that way, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is years and years and generations of work that's going to be needed in order to break that pattern. And at the same time, if we zoom in to the individual, there might be individuals within smaller systems that have experienced certain things that may now be the start of a generational pattern for that person's generation. So if we look at how mothers, when they're pregnant, the stress that they experience within the environment that they're in. This could be at work, family, different relationships, and everything like that. All these different types of stressors affect the baby. And so this child is born, and this child, may now be predisposed to things like anxiety and depression because of what the mom was experiencing while she was pregnant. And so thinking about it that way, I feel like, at least for me, there's a personal responsibility for me to make sure that um, I'm aware of my mental health. I'm aware of what I'm doing that's going to impact my child, because our children learn from us just like we learned from our parents, and our parents learned from their parents
Mhm.
before them. So that's kind of where that transgenerational pattern continues, and the cycle just keeps repeating itself unless someone within that line takes a moment to be like, you know what, like this is not okay.
This
Like
isn't
these
cool.
different,
Yeah.
yeah, like
This is really,
these
really bad,
different
guys.
patterns,
Yeah.
yeah, like these different patterns of parenting, these different patterns of being in relationship with people, these different patterns of interacting with each other. This is not okay. So unless someone takes that step back to be like, this is not okay, I want to do something about it to start changing it, the cycle is going to continue. And so I just feel like, again, it comes down to this personal realization, this personal awakening that we each as individuals need to do that work, and from there we can expand it to the family, and then of course to the bigger community, and then we keep zooming out and everything like that. But it's hard work.
It is. And people a lot of times, uh, I've noticed talking, like with members of my family, I'm going to use them
Mhm.
as an example. I've noticed that, people are like, "Oh, well, I'm too old for, for this
Mhm.
type of change." And I think that that is just absolutely not true. You are never too
Mhm.
old to evaluate your relationship
Yeah.
with yourself and how you treated your child.
Mhm.
You are never too old to go back and try to fix a relationship with your child or
Mhm.
or your parents, like either you can go either way with the older
Right.
generation it's never too late, to get it on a better path,
Right.
get the emotional relationships where they should be for the benefit of everyone.
Right.
So I think that emotional self-care is very important. I
Very
think
important.
emotional, accountability, because like you said, it's hard. So if you want to work on yourself and someone says to you, you know, you hurt me, or you did this, or you did that, it's hard, not to be defensive, not to have that, defense mechanism. It's a coping skill. I mean, it's worked this long, right? It's hard to look at yourself and take accountability
Mhm.
for whatever your part was in that traumatic moment,
Right.
or in that, toxic relationship. So I just encourage everyone to kind of um be aware of that, and not be afraid of it, because it's so much better, on the other side.
Mhm.
There's so much
Mhm.
strength and freedom in vulnerability,
Yeah.
and being able to, just be like, okay, well, I was wrong about this, and
Right.
I want to change it. I want to get better. Or,
Mhm.
I'm struggling with this. I need to go and get help,
Right.
or, there's just so much freedom there. It's
Yeah.
not, you don't hold on to like any weight, or you're not carrying any barriers that aren't for you.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
it is hard, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah,
And we get
definitely.
there.
Yeah, I was also thinking about some of the other effects of generational trauma that are not necessarily um, related to physical health. So when we look at families and patterns of parenting, so within a family, there might be um, a way of coping or a way of being where we don't talk about feelings, we don't talk about emotions. It's always work, work, work. It's always achieving, achieving, achieving. And so part of that, I really feel like, and I've come to understand that a lot of that is rooted in our parents' trauma and their parents' trauma that some of them may not have even been aware of. And so if we think about how maybe as a Black mom, so there's a Black mom who's struggling with depression, but this mom doesn't want her children to see that she's struggling because mom wants to be strong. And going back to what we've talked about before with this image of being strong, like the strong Black woman, the Black super mom, whatever.
Yeah.
So mom doesn't want her children to see that she's struggling. And so what does mom do? Mom put on the big boy pants. Mom goes to work. Mom powers through it, and mom is just holding on to all these different painful feelings. And mom might be experiencing depression for something that happened in her life that she doesn't feel safe to talk about. She doesn't feel comfortable talking about, or because of the messages that her parents gave her
Yeah.
in terms of keeping things within the family. We don't talk about things outside of the family. It's a family secret. So mom feels this pressure to keep everything inside. And so mom's depressed, but she's holding onto everything. So the children are watching mom, and believe it or not, our children learn from us. They pick up on everything, just like
Yeah.
we did from our parents.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
the children are learning that, okay, even though I can see that mom is sad, I can see that mom is struggling, but mom's teaching us that even if you're sad, you don't recognize that. You just power through it. So these are the patterns that I think that are even harder to break because it's so hard to recognize that that is rooted in a traumatic experience that is being taught, that is being passed down, that children are learning. I mean, I will give an example, a personal example. So, like within my family, so the Haitian community, we don't talk about feelings and emotions. Like, you don't have feelings. As long as you're fed, your primary needs are taken care of, you're good. So if you were to be like, I'm feeling kind of down today, like I'm feeling sad, the response would be, what do you have to be sad about? Like, you have food to eat, you have clothes to wear, you don't have anything to be sad about. And so we learn these things. We learn that feelings and emotions don't matter. You just focus on what you need to do. And we learn to suppress these things. And so when I take a step back and I look at like my grandparents and my great grandparents, this is something that they had to learn because of the environment that they grew up in. And so these things continue to impact us. And again, I can't say it enough because I feel like I need to say this. Some of these things are hard to break because we don't recognize them. We're not able to recognize them because they're so subtle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Audrey says that is one that is hard for me as a child of abusive parents. And while I know my parents had their own trauma and their past that contributed to their behavior, it's difficult to reconcile that with the neglect and abuse I experienced. I have broke the cycle, but still struggle with toxic behavior because of my upbringing. Thank you so much, Audrey, for being vulnerable and sharing that with us.
A perfect example of how it is difficult
Mhm.
to, you know, uh, reconcile with generational
Yeah.
trauma. It's you, having abusive parents, having, depressed parents, that still sends a message to you.
Mhm.
Your parents are the ones that, provide you a lot of times, or your caregivers are the ones that provide you a lot of times with your core beliefs
Yeah.
about yourself. So, the trauma that they had gave them the beliefs about themselves, and
Mhm.
then they thought that that was the appropriate belief to, bestow on their child, and it's not. It
Mhm.
wasn't. And so you get a kind of like a unknown, and then it can get kind of like weird, because you're like, well, I don't, understand why you had to, raise me this way. This was abusive. And your parents are like, I was raised that way and I turned out fine,
Yes, I've heard that so
So
many
it's
times.
just not, I mean, it's really, really hard. It's really,
Mhm.
really hard to address it. And the amount of effort and vulnerability that it takes to, have that conversation and have that person, because that's a part of your like self healing, to be able to have that conversation. And then if that person is like, I don't feel like that it was like that. I don't feel like I did that to you. I don't feel like it that your feelings are justified. Um, it's hard to understand and still, be like, okay, and still move on from that.
Mhm.
But like I was saying before, there's a lot of freedom and vulnerability, and if you can go to someone and say, this is how I felt about this certain situation. And if, you've done the self work to be okay with however they respond, you know,
Mhm.
um, then that's the progress that you can use to better the generation coming after you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
And so, healing is so important. Thank you for all of your comments, Audrey. We
yeah.
really appreciate them. The latest comment that Audrey posted said, healing is hard. Ripping those blinders off can be painful because it makes you confront your own behaviors that are less than stellar. And that is true. That's the part of healing that is really hard. Healing is freeing, but in order to get to the freedom part, you have to work through the hard stuff, and it's hard. And I tell clients all the time, and every chance that I get to say this, the process of healing is very difficult. It's challenging and it's hard. And at the same time, it's worth it. It's worth it because, especially when we're talking about these transgenerational things, it's worth it because you're going to break the cycle for your descendants.
Mhm.
And as I was reflecting on this today, and this whole topic is a very complicated topic to talk about because there's so many different facets to it. But I was outside with my daughter this morning, and we were just kind of playing and stuff, and then we took a moment just to kind of stand still. And I saw our shadows on the ground, and I just had this moment of, oh my gosh, like here's a little shadow standing next to my shadow. And I started thinking about the generations before me and all that they had to go through in order for me to be here today, to be where I am today. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, this is the work that I need to do. I need to continue to do. And this is the work that I need to continue to encourage other people to do because looking at um, these two shadows, it wasn't just my own shadow, it was my shadow and her shadow. And seeing that little person, it was like what I'm doing today, the work that I'm doing today, prioritizing my mental health, my own healing, that is going to affect her because she's going to be walking in my shadow. Like I walked in the shadow of the ones before me. And
Mhm.
so I was just kind of like, oh my gosh. And I also used to be so afraid of shadows, like so afraid of my own shadow. But I started looking at what was in the shadow differently, right? And
Right.
so that's that part of the healing process. It's hard, like just thinking about these things. Like I'm feeling so many different emotions right now because this is such a dear topic to me, just kind of
Mhm.
thinking about these things. But I just want to encourage people, if you're watching this right now or if you're watching the replay, it's hard and it's worth it. It is so important. And so going back to my post about the shadows, like I was thinking one day I'm going to be an ancestor. I'm
Yeah.
going to be a matriarch.
Yes.
I'm going to have descendants, and what I do today is going to impact them.
Yep.
Just like a lot of my experiences today are a direct result of what my ancestors before me did.
Yeah.
So think about it this way. Hopefully, this is helpful for someone to just kind of reframe just how important it is that we do this work. It starts with us if we're going to break these different um, generational patterns and heal from trauma and just kind of move forward. We have to do this work.
Absolutely. And it's also important, I want to say that you do the work and you don't give up on the
Yeah.
work, you know? I was thinking of a conversation that I had with someone a few days ago, and I've really been trying to like encourage this person, like,
Mhm.
and really kind of motivate this person. They're going through a hard time. And they said to me, right, and I'm really actually proud of their their attempts before, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, working with families can be
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. It's hard.
Um, they said to me, because I'm like, well, why don't we try this? Why don't we try this way to help,
Mhm.
solve the problem. And they said to me, um, I'll have to think about it because last time, I tried, it didn't work out. And
Mhm.
last time, when you said, trust me, it still didn't work out. And I was like, oh, and I couldn't do anything but validate, because
Mhm,
I felt their pain.
mhm,
And I, at the time, I wanted to be like, keep going. Keep going. I know that, it didn't work out last time, but, when I say trust me, I mean, trust me that it's worth it at the
mhm.
end to, keep going. Um, but I had to validate at that time because I know it's painful. So
Yeah.
that is probably another important thing, that when you're dealing with generational trauma
Mhm,
and
mhm.
trying to heal, don't give up,
Right.
don't give up and take accountability. If you're talking to someone and the conversation doesn't go the way that you wanted it to, just take accountability
Mhm.
for that. And then, just keep it as healthy as you can, because
Yeah,
it is hard and it's a process.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, this was such a great conversation.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, I'm kind of at the point in the conversation where I feel like we've talked about a lot and we've kind of given a lot of information. And so I'm like, yeah, this might be a good place to kind of bring it in, bring it all in, bring it together, and kind of wrap up and stuff. And so I just wanted to ask you, Cartessa, if you had like any other thoughts that you wanted to share, um, anything that you feel like, would have been good to kind of put out there that we didn't. I'm looking at my notes and I think that we covered everything.
Um, just going over like the core points that I want, when in regards to generational trauma, one, it's never too late to break the cycle, to repair the relationship, to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Two, it is very hard and it is very painful,
Hmm.
but it's not just it's not like, specifically geared towards one person. It's a whole
Right.
family of pain
Yeah.
and anguish. So if we could recognize that we don't necessarily have to compete or compare, like you said, our
Hmm.
traumas with the other,
Yeah.
that could help. And then just don't give up. Just don't give
Yeah.
up. It's worth
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And just a final thought. I just want to say that I think that it's worth it for us and for everyone out there who's working on their own healing and trying to break these different patterns. It's really worth it to learn to give ourselves the love, the attention, and the healing that maybe we didn't get from our parents and that they didn't get from their parents, and so on and so forth. It's worth it to give ourselves that love, that care, that attention, because our children and our descendants deserve that.
Yeah.
So that's my final thought. So thank you so much for everyone who is watching the live with us. Thank you, Audrey, for all of your comments. We really appreciate you being here. So
Thank you,
we
Audrey.
will see
You did
you
really good
all.
today.
Yeah, we'll see you all next time.
All right.
Bye, Professor.
Bye.